Piers Morgan, The Insider. Now, I've been delving into this book. It came out in the early 2000s. Piers Morgan wrote it in sort of a journal or diary format, and it is so captivating and intriguing because it takes you behind all the big juicy scandals in the 1990s and also early 2000s. And of course, he was the editor of the News of the World for a couple of years and then on to the Mirror. Now, a lot of the juiciest parts are when he was editor of the Mirror. And so you're getting it from the perspective of a tabloid newspaper editor, but you're also getting it from the perspective of someone that helped create the headlines at the time. Now, it was interesting to me when Piers Morgan reached out to Fergie about her sad news about having breast cancer this week. And I just want to add my thoughts to that, and I hope she makes a speedy recovery, a full recovery. But when Piers Morgan reached out to her to wish her well, he said that Diana introduced them. Now, that sort of doesn't gel with what he says in The Insider. Now, this isn't a hit thing on Fergie. This is just interesting. It's not negative towards her at all. But in this book, he mentions the first time that he meets Fergie, and it's really intriguing because she reached out to him, and it was right at the time when her autobiography was released, Sarah My Story, and he had a first lunch with her, and he says in this journal format his impressions of that lunch. Had an incredibly entertaining lunch with Fergie at a restaurant in Dorking today. Her autobiography's just come out and she's keen to try and rebuild her rather smashed up reputation. And then he goes on and describes it a bit more. But the really interesting thing I found was this line. After a couple of drinks, she relaxed a bit and started laughing and telling gossipy stories. Now, as you know, in the recent court cases that are unfolding with the Mirror, the royal reporter said that Piers Morgan often overrode the royal reporting desk and made corrections or suggestions. And I'm just wondering if maybe there was a few gossipy lunches and dinners that actually informed Piers Morgan of sort of inside details of the royal family. Because there's another dinner soon after that. And this is one that Fergie invited me to dinner today at Mosselman's with a couple of her aides. And he says it's a riotous affair. I imagine it would be fun. Fergie is good fun. She drank like a fish and laughed like Sid James. Now, this is the interesting bit. And got more and more hilariously indiscreet as the evening wore on. So I'm thinking, they're having all these hilarious dinners and lunches and whatever, and Fergie likes a glass of wine or two, and she's getting hilariously indiscreet. So I'm thinking it would be quite effortless for the then editor of the Mirror newspaper to get the inside track on some royal goss. Now, whether he actually ever printed it or used it in any way, we'll never know. But it amused me when I read that because I thought of Harry saying that people that need to repair their reputation are dangerous because they forge partnerships with the media. Now, he was blaming Camilla in his book, but I'm thinking that maybe Auntie Sarah had a bit of contact, Harry, with the then editor of the Mirror. Now, getting on to other really fantastic stories in this book, it's just so packed full of information. I think I could do many videos on just this book. But there was a really interesting story. It was fascinating. And it was in 2003, and it kicked off in August. And it was when the then royal reporter for the Mirror noticed that Buckingham Palace had actually put an ad out looking for a footman. And she had the brilliant idea, or rather sneaky idea, to get a reporter to get that job and have an insider at the palace. So they looked around in the office for someone who would look the part, and there was a young intern sort of trainee there called Ryan Parry. And so they thought, perfect, and he was up for it. So they filled out the application for the job. And when they filled out the form, they told the complete truth, because they said that if the security check revealed him, then that proved that security at the palace worked, and that would be a great story in itself. So they filled out the application form honestly, except for one crucial detail, the fact that Ryan Parry actually worked at the Mirror. So he got the job as a footman and he started. And after about 6 weeks, he'd already worked himself up into such a position of trust that he was serving the Queen breakfast and even walking the corgis. So let me know what you think. But when I read this, I felt a little uncomfortable. And I guess it just sort of challenges you a bit, that the idea of the invasion of privacy, the fact that the Queen was unaware that, there was an insider, that there was a mole in the palace, going to report back on her every move. It just feels like such an invasion. And the fact that he was actually serving her breakfast. But the Mirror, and particularly Piers Morgan, justified this by saying that, well, they were proving that security at the palace was very lax and that they might actually be protecting the monarchy in the future. So life goes on for Ryan Parry in the palace, but there's a major event coming up that made the Mirror a little bit nervous, that made them think that maybe there had to be an end date to Ryan's job as footman at Buckingham Palace, and that was because of an official visit by President George Bush. He was coming over to Buckingham Palace, and that was going to be in early November. So they decided that Ryan must be pulled out around that time because they were concerned about the US Security Service, Secret Service, because they are world renowned. They're exemplary at all their checks. And they were really scared that Ryan was going to be discovered and that he would be deemed to be a threat to the president. So President George Bush arrives, and Ryan, the night before, actually has a secret meeting with Piers Morgan and the royal reporter and anyone else who knew. There weren't many, in a secret set-aside room at the Mirror, and he showed them what he had. He gave them everything that he'd collected over that period of time, and he'd taken photographs of the Queen's breakfast table. And it was with great mirth that they discovered that she used Tupperware. Now, can you imagine when that was printed in the Mirror, how absolutely delighted Tupperware would have been? The fact that the Queen kept her cereal fresh and crispy using Tupperware containers. I mean, you just can't buy advertising like that. So it was decided that Ryan would play his part with President George Bush, and then he would leave the palace that night at the end of his shift forever. And that's what unfolded. He actually served drinks at the welcoming drinks party for the president, and he even got to put chocolate on the president's pillow. But there was great anxiety from the then editor Piers Morgan because he was really scared that Ryan had been rumbled by the Secret Service, because Ryan did not appear at the end of his shift at 8:30. He was still inside the palace and they received no communication from him. He had a phone on him and he had been texting them behind a curtain at the drinks party, but then he went radio silent because it got a little bit too risky. And so they were really scared. They were scared he'd been rumbled by the Secret Service and that he was being held because he was a threat to the president or even a threat to the Queen, I would imagine. So Piers Morgan had a few tense hours at home waiting by the phone, just waiting to hear that Ryan Parry had managed to leave the palace. And around 10 p.m. he got the call, the eagle has landed. And it was Ryan Parry, and he'd made his way out of the palace, and he had a short conversation with Piers Morgan, and he said, "Is it all right if I go and have a drink now, boss?" Because it sounds like he needed it. So 5 a.m. the next morning, the first print run goes out, and it caused the sort of storm that you would expect. And it was a massive scoop for Piers Morgan, a massive scoop for the Mirror. And he was quite nervous because he knew it could go pear-shaped. It could, the public opinion and the whole view could really go against him. And it was an extremely risky thing to do. But in all the interviews, he made sure to emphasize the security aspect and the fact that they were able to get Ryan Parry into the palace. And the fact that the whole time throughout his employment, they hadn't once checked his bag. So it was Piers Morgan's point that he could have had a weapon, that it was extremely dangerous. And the fact that that happened and he successfully served drinks to the then President of the United States and even put a chocolate on his pillow. So a few days after that, the Attorney General representing Queen Elizabeth II found Ryan Parry and served him with an injunction. But the thing is that everything the Mirror wanted to say had already been printed. They'd already got their scoop. And so the fact that they'd managed to keep it all secret just long enough, just until the presses had run and they managed to get it out on the street, meant that it was a very successful little exercise. So leave a comment down below if you'd like any more stories from this book, The Insider. There are so many fantastic, juicy stories. And also, give me your opinion. Do you think that that was just beyond the pale, what they did? Or do you think actually it would have served to have made Queen Elizabeth II and her family more secure from that point on? Let me know what you think, and I'll see you again really soon. Bye.